My name is Stephanie Weber. I'm a communications manager with the European Intellectual Property Helpdesk, and we've teamed up with the EPO for this series. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the European IP Helpdesk, but those of you who don't, no worries. Who are not, don't worry, we will tell you a little bit more about us towards the end of the session. It's my pleasure to be your host today, but as you can see, I'm not alone. I'm having a wonderful group of speakers with me, and you will get to know all of them in the course of this event. I can assure you that. But for now, I'd like to quickly pass on the microphone to my, let's say, co-host today, and that is Ilya Rudik, and he'll say a few words on himself.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I don't want to interrupt your beautiful introduction. I just wanted to welcome all of you to this event, which is hopefully the first in a series. Again, this is a cooperation project together with the European IP Helpdesk, and many other people contributed. Some of them you will see today, but also internally within the EPO. It's a cooperation between the European Patent Academy and the Chief Economist unit, and I hope you will enjoy it.
Thanks a lot, Ilya. And now before we do dive right in, just a few final technical comments. So you will be able to ask questions throughout the session by using the chat window. And we will do our best as a team in the background to get back to you right away via the chat, but we won't relay the questions to the whole plenum. And another important remark as well, we will record the session, so for others to be able to take a look at it later, but your names will not appear in that recording. And now I'm very pleased to actually introduce you to our first speaker, who is Mr. Yanis Zagias, who's the Deputy Head of Unit of the Valorization Policies and IPR Unit at the DG Research and Innovation of the European Commission. And Yanis will paint the bigger picture for us in a way, and set the stage for all subsequent speakers by telling us a little bit more about the EU's valorization policy and how we can make research work for society. And clearly technology transfer processes are an essential building block in that. So welcome, Yanis. It's a great pleasure to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Thank you, Ilya. Thank you for this wonderful invitation and the chance to come in front of you today and try to explain a bit what is the overall EU policy when it comes to knowledge transfer and in general the knowledge valorization, which are the channels that we want actually to use in order to valorize more knowledge. Yeah, I would like to just draw the bigger picture and basically explain to you what now we call knowledge valorization, which was always, let's say, an attempt of the Commission, especially when it comes to research and innovation framework programs, to streamline the results stemming from the investment in the projects towards the economy and the society. And this now, the last 2 years, has a particular name called valorization policy, which basically what it is just trying to create more value out of the overall investment in research and innovation and help beneficiaries do the next step in their exploitation and valorization plans towards, let's say, the market, towards the industry, towards society. And of course, IP management and IP knowledge assets, patents, the fundamental work of EPO is, of course, is key in this valorization policy. And I will start by just saying a couple of words on how we see our cooperation with EPO, which is long-lasting and it goes in different directions and different dimensions. But what we would like to do more with EPO right now is to cooperate more on IP awareness raising. Basically, we need to together act in fighting the IP illiteracy, or let's say the low IP literacy level in the Union, and help everybody understand that EPO, the Commission, even other local entities can help beneficiaries, can help companies, can help researchers. You have to allow me that I see things from the researcher's point of view and the research team and the academic, but it's not only, because but mainly the research innovation program aims at the research community. So we need to be there for them, help them, and make them understand that they can do a lot of things with their intellectual property assets. We want to cooperate in policy development, and the biggest part of my presentation will be what exactly we're doing on the policy level. And we would like to have EPO next to us in all the major policy initiatives when it comes to the smart use of IP. And of course, we want to cooperate further when it comes to the Horizon Europe program. And Horizon Europe is important to give to the beneficiaries the possibility to access services coming from different sites, from different organizations, but at the end they will help them, like the fantastic job done by the IP Helpdesk, to do something more with their IP, to do something more with their results and make their projects even more successful. So we started back in 2018, seeing how much of importance was taking the overall knowledge circulation in the EU. And then you have the member states through the council asking the Commission to develop a strategy about more uptake of the RNI results, how we can use more of the data, and also examine how we can share best practices for knowledge transfer amongst the member states at national and regional level. Then the new era, the new European Research Area for Research Innovation, came up with a new approach and came up with a very ambitious action plan, which includes dedicated action on the guiding principles for knowledge valorization. So I will say a bit more about these guiding principles later on, but also a code of practice for the smart use of IP, because the IP is one of the major channels for valorizing, for creating more value coming from the overall R&I investment. Of course, we started this work with workshops with member states, and of course, we ended up having more, let's say, policy relevant and high-level policy mentioning about the valorization and what we need to do about the knowledge sharing and knowledge acceleration in Europe. And within the new European Research Area, what we have to do is to revise the old 2008 recommendation on management of IP and knowledge transfer, and make it a bit broader now and address it differently, taking into account that we're not in 2008 anymore and lots of things have changed. And of course, lately, the Competitiveness Council on renewing the European Research Area, they took a particular stress on how important is the knowledge transfer. So all of this just to mention that it is something very important. It's not only important because the politicians say so, it's something important because there's a huge investment done in R&I, and we need to see this transforming into excellent results, solutions, and benefits for society and the economy. So we started with stakeholders, we started with member states, we started with consultations and surveys, and we ended up with this plan under ERA. And as you see, all the work we're trying to do now is how to translate these results into the economy and to ensure the market uptake. And the two first actions are the guiding principles for knowledge valorization, followed up by the codes of practice for a smart use of IP. There will be more codes of practice. The first part, the guiding principles, is basically addressing the policymaker level. So these guiding principles we expect to be translated into national and regional policies. If we're lucky enough, they will be even translated into legal initiatives from the member states, while the codes of practice will be something that addresses the practitioners level. It will address the people which are hands-on, and they can tell them more on what to do with the IP that they have in their hands. And of course, you see that the outcomes vary from closer connection of the research world with society or the industry, to increase the IP literacy, and this kind of activities are expected. We did a policy review which basically summarizes the overall idea of this valorization policy, and of course shows what's the way forward. Within this policy review, we have identified the main actors, the main channels, and some of the tools, it's not an exhaustive list, that we can use in order to achieve the valorization in the Union. And what is important is to see that in all channels, the smart use of IP, in general, the use of actually the use that we're doing with the results that we're producing is fundamental. And you can see that there are several ways to use these tools in order to achieve more valorization. But if you keep this picture in your mind, this is pretty much what we have seen as major channels. And we would like to, as Commission, to be active in all of these channels, to be ready to provide solutions, help, services in all of these channels, in all of these tools, to help basically beneficiaries and companies and member states in doing the next steps in their valorization. So what we have done so far in policy contributions, because valorization, we have to admit that it's something that cuts across. It's cutting across the framework program for research and innovation, but also other EU programs. So what we see that it's important is that we need to address the skills part in the union. So there's the skills agenda communication that we try to put specific elements of knowledge valorization, which is the industry, academia, knowledge exchange. There's the global approach for R&I, because we cannot have creation of value if we just think only about the union. We need to think about the global approach to the international community and to third countries. There's the IP action plan and the industry strategy managed from DG Grow. And of course, there we try to influence certain elements that will have a great impact into the research and innovation community. And of course, in the ERA Pact, you have very clearly the value creation. And of course, the knowledge valorization cuts across the EU missions. And the EU missions is not something, it's not business as usual under Horizon Europe. It's something that cuts across all EU programs and also member states programs at national and regional level. What we try to do is also what we were asked from the political, let's say, hierarchy, to share best practices. So we started this by opening everything to the member states and to the stakeholders, and we organized the first EU Knowledge Valorization Week, which was a great success, and it shows us the way that we need to have a forum, we need to have a platform of exchanges of these best practices. They're not all of them best practices, they can be just practices that actually work. It doesn't need to be the best example, and then one member state can have more than one practice and in more than one valorization channel. So we invited these stakeholders, member states, to come and speak in this valorization week, and which will be repeated next year in 22, I think in March. And that gave the idea of creating this platform, which was inaugurated by our Commissioner Gabriel in the R&I days in 2021. And we're very happy that we have this knowledge valorization platform as an exchange platform for best practices, ideas, and actually what works in the member states. And now it's open also to other stakeholders. So it will act as a repository of best practices. It will serve as a community of practice, because we intend to run in this platform all the communities of practice that will help us develop the codes of practice for the smart use of IP, but also for the standardization, as I will say in a moment. And of course, we would like to have a relevant thematic focus each month or every second month about a specific channel, a specific tool about valorization. And of course, the idea is to help this cross-border dialogue. This is important to start talking to each other about what works well in our context, in our environment, in our countries, in our regions, in order to be able to help others do the same. So I'll wrap it up with a couple of slides on the next steps. So where exactly we are now? As you saw from ERA, we were asked to deliver guiding principles for knowledge valorization and codes of practice for the smart use of IP. The guiding principles work has already started. Under the ERA forum for the transition, there is a specific subgroup which was set up with member states and associated countries, and we expect to have the first draft in December 21. And then after December 21, open the roundtable consultations with every stakeholder in Europe that will last until January. And we would like to be ready to have these guiding principles ready to be endorsed by the Council, the Commission, of course, but also by the Council within 22. And now it depends whether it will be in the French presidency or in the Czech presidency, so first or second semester of 22. And this is at member states level, because as I said before, it addresses the political level, it addresses the policy making, and we expect these guiding principles to be the ones that will be translated into the national and regional policies. And what will escort these guiding principles is two sets of code of practices. The first code of practice, as I said, will be on the smart use of intellectual property. And of course, it will be with stakeholders through the community of practice that we want to run in the knowledge valorization platform. The community of practice will be launched in autumn 21, so we expect to launch it by the end of October, beginning of November. And of course, this code of practice is expected to be delivered until summer 22. As I said, it depends under which presidency, rotating presidency of the council will be put. We expect this to be mostly under the Czech presidency, but it's not yet confirmed. And of course, we would like to have an expression of interest which is open to the community, it's open to everyone that feels that can contribute, and we would like your help and contribution. EPO is on our side on this also, and it's very important to have the whole community engaged. The second code of practice, which I didn't speak much, is about a code of practice on standardization. Because we believe that standardization is an important channel for knowledge valorization, especially when it comes to industry. So we want to make a code of practice for researchers on standardization that will be also launched in early 22, and again will be delivered summer 22. And of course, we started with a survey to beneficiaries. We have a dedicated study that examines which are the elements that can go into such code, and of course, co-design these activities with the Commission and stakeholders. And I think that this wraps up my presentation. Thank you very much for your time, and I will be here to take any questions if you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yanis, for these very interesting insights into the strategies and priorities of the European Commission. And as we've heard, a lot of your concern is about sharing best practices, or as you just said, practices in itself. Maybe also sometimes practices where things did not work out are very useful resources to learn. And this is actually a perfect transition, bringing us to the next point in our agenda. And I'm now turning Ilya into the presenter, because he will tell us a little bit more about the rationale and the idea behind this new case study series. So Ilya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yes, so Ioannis, many thanks also from my side for giving such a great introduction. I think this is perfect transition to our topic for today, which is to present you a new series of case studies about successful technology transfer journeys from European institutions. I just to quote you a bit, do something more with the results from research. IP, the channel for creating value to the economy and benefits for society, and also start sharing best practices for smart use of IP. This is exactly what the project is about. So many thanks for making the transitions so simple for us. But nevertheless, let me give you a broader picture. So what you see here is the statistics of our main applicant groups at the EPO. And as you can see, around 5% of our applications, at least for the year 2020, came from universities and public research organizations. Of course, the real number might be higher because we know that it's not always the university or the research organization that is filing for patent protection, but sometimes the cooperation partner or maybe the researcher himself. So the 5% is most likely underrepresenting it. But what I find fascinating is that if you look at what I would say technologies that are very important for the society, just to give you an example, in the area of recycling of plastics, or in alternative plastics, and we published a new report about it. And in this report, you will find a much larger number, which is around 20%, which is the contribution of universities and public research organizations, especially from Europe, where we see that European institutions are very strong contributors to the patenting activity in that area. Also, if you look at the areas such as additive manufacturing, or climate change mitigation technologies, here again we see double digits. So the role of university is even higher in particular areas which are currently very important for society. and for future economic and technological developments. However, as Johannes also said, Europe might not have always been the strongest region to bring those technologies also to market. Of course, we were also very much interested in to understand what is actually the share of those technologies that are at the end brought to market after they have been patented. And for the EPO, we conducted a survey recently, and what we found is around 36% of patent applications that came from universities and public research institutions actually made it to the market, so they have been commercially exploited at the time when we asked. However, despite that number being relatively high, so at least for those inventions that for which protection is sought at the EPO, we see a large number of exploitation. There's still a larger share which is not exploited, which is around 42%, where we at least were reported that there are plans ongoing for exploitation, but in 21%, no exploitation was even foreseen for different reasons, be it because it has not reached market maturity, so it was very early in the market readiness level, or because it was impossible to find the right partners, or it was impossible to negotiate a licensing agreement or to support a spin-off creation. After monitoring it and also providing evidence on the share of exploitation, but also on the obstacles, we thought it's also important actually to show some successful cases, and in particular show how companies can actually overcome this barrier and transition to successful presence on the market, to transition to successful commercial exploitation of the great inventions and the great technologies which have been developed at European universities and public research organizations. And we kicked off the project and identified the right experts, the right companies that can provide us, let's say, a description of the journey from the lab, so successful research project at the university, to final success on the market or even on many markets. Because as you know, for all of the companies, the journey is not at the end, but we know that they have been successful, meaning that there is a service, there is a product on the market, and it's actually selling very well. And for each of the case studies, we wanted to highlight what was the role of patents in facilitating this technology transfer, how patents can support the business success, especially when you have a company that is now trying to operate with the technology. How did they use patents before they reach the market, but also what are the next steps after they have finally reached the market? We know that technology transfer can have different routes, and we also wanted to show the diversity of the different ways how technology can reach from the lab to the market, and also the full life cycle perspective. And in each of the case studies, we also made an effort to highlight particularly good practices when it comes to IP strategy and IP management. But without further ado, I would like to hand over to the moderator of the first case study, Yorkshire, who's the coordinator at the European IP Helpdesk, and who will also introduce one of the experts, Caroline Pump. Jörg, over to you.
Thank you, Ilya. Thank you very much. It is really my pleasure to take over to introduce this very interesting first case of today. So my name is Jörg Scherer. I'm from the European IP Helpdesk, and today what we will learn is that we will hear from a technology that originally had its starting point in the laboratories of a Swedish university. But meanwhile, the new Viven technology even facilitated a Mars landing and is already deployed in different business environments. And all this has not been possible without patents. So actually, it's a fantastic journey to listen and to learn from. So however, it's not up to me to present this case. So I'm happy to welcome our expert for the very first session, Caroline Pump, who has much better insights into this very good success story. So Caroline is an IP professional and she's one of the authors of the case study. She has many years of experiences in successfully counseling university startups, and her perspective on the case will be extremely valuable. So welcome, Caroline. The floor is yours. Thank you.
So thank you, Jörg, for your very nice introduction. You can see here to the right a piece of carbon fiber, and we have here some advantages of this composite. And as Jörg mentioned, this originated at a Swedish university, Chalmers University of Technology, by Dr. Nandan Kuker, who then was working there. So you can see to the left here, we have the extreme carbon fabrics spread too. So you can achieve much thinner laminates, but still get a stronger output. So what we see here is basically that this is a way of decreasing the weight of composite products, and that of course has many advantages, as we will see when we go into the applications. But first, I just want to mention that when Dr. Kuker had invented this material, it was not self-evident what to use it for. It could potentially be protected by patents. So one of the first questions was if you should provide patent protection for the material as such, or if you should provide patent for the process as such, this particular weaving process. And Dr. Nandan Kuker then came into contact with business angels. One of them was Fredrik Winberg, who provided some funding to apply for patents. And also Dr. Kuker came into contact with the Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship, where 2 full-time students actually worked with this over a year, and they are now the CEO and Vice President of Oxeon, and that is Henrik Blicker and Andreas Mertzman. So if we continue a little bit considering the applications, as I said, this was not self-evident what to use it for, but there were several things identified. First, whether or not you should sell the material, or if you should sell the machines which were producing the material. And Oxeon rather soon decided to actually sell material. So they were not interested in selling the machines that made the material. As you can see on this figure on the left, this is a business-to-business model. So, for example, Oxeon sells this material for sports equipment. Some examples are hockey sticks, where this material is very durable and light. Other examples are bicycles, for example, when it's good to have light and strong composites. There are also several industrial applications, and as Jörg mentioned, even in aerospace, because of course, since these composites are lighter but still very durable, they are very handy if you are using them in vehicles of any kind, because if you can decrease the weight, that means that you can also decrease the fuel costs, which is very important, and especially with the change to trying to go towards greener energy, then of course the less fossil fuel you can use, the better. So again, I wanted to point out here that we have 2 aspects of this. We have the material as such, and we have the process for manufacturing the material and the weaving technology. And Oxeon rather early on thought that, well, we should actually try to patent both the material and the process, even though they had decided that we will probably only sell the material, but controlling also the process might be beneficial because first of all, it provides a stronger protection, but also that there might be possibilities of actually license the patents, and that was something that they did rather early on. So they did consider their own needs, they did consider the customers' needs, but they also considered the potential licensees' needs. So I think this is an important success factor when considering what you actually should obtain a patent for to to think a little bit broader, not just about your own business model, but also about, is there anything in this technology that might be of interest to someone who is not a competitor, but who might still be interested in obtaining access to this technology. So again then, considering the license as such, what were you to license? It's easier to license a technology if you have a patent for it. It's more packaged that way, and once you have the patent, it is easy to prove that you actually have the right to this. You can of course also license know-how to some extent, but it's more tricky because it's not as packaged. You will have to describe it yourself. And Oxeon did to some extent license some know-how which were connected to the patents, but they did license this to someone who was not a competitor and who was active in other fields, and basically using the technology for different type of materials. And you can of course also license trademarks. Oxeon also has trademark protection, and this is typically connected. But something else that was important for the success of Oxeon was that they actually had a weaving machine. So it probably wouldn't have been sufficient in the dialogue with the licensee if they weren't able to provide the samples and if they weren't able to show that this was actually working, because the information included in a patent application isn't necessarily sufficient in and of itself to show that this technology actually can be transferred. So this was mentioned by Andreas Martzman as a very key success factor, that they actually had this machine and they could make samples and they could try it out basically. And that was very important in the negotiation with the licensee. And I would also like to mention something about the scope of the license. I'm sure that you all know a lot of the basics about patents, and the reason why I wanted to mention this anyway is that licensing is sometimes seen as an all or nothing solution, that either you license the technology or you don't. But what I want to show with this picture is that there are actually lots of ways to slice a license. You can decide upon the specific rights, for example. So in this case, when Oxeon licensed this, the licensee was particularly interested in using the technology in their factories. They weren't really interested in selling the technology to others or distribute the technology as such. So basically, the focus was that they should be able to actually use this when they produced another material. And the exclusivity is also important to tie to this, I think, because sometimes there is a focus on having non-exclusive licenses so that the technology can be used by many. But at the same time, a non-exclusive license might not be worth as much for the licensee, and the licensee might not be interested in paying as much for it. So then, instead of thinking that this is a binary exercise and either choose an exclusive license or a non-exclusive license, it is possible to think about, well, is there a particular field of use where you could perhaps provide exclusivity? And what about the geography? Because something that I see often is that companies say that, well, the territory is all the countries where the patent is valid. But then again, I think you should also consider this from a business perspective, that do you really want to be able to use this in all countries where the patent is valid, or could this perhaps be limited somewhat? And also when it comes to the application field of use, that in which situations do you want to use this? Because you probably don't want to license your technology to a competitor, but there may be lots of other opportunities. And another key takeaway that I think should be mentioned in connection with licensing was that since Oxeon managed to obtain a license agreement with the licensee very early on, that also meant that the IP licensing was actually a source of income early on, which meant that instead of financing Oxeon's development solely by venture capital and by own sales, they also did have some income from licensing, which was an important part of that. And I will also briefly just show you the timeline. As you can see, this is we are now almost at 20 years later. The inventor got the help from the business angels to file the first patent application. It was then presented to Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship. Oxeon was incorporated, and Oxeon obtained a patent in the US and then also at the EPO. They initiated the products on the market under the trademark Techstream. And then there was the license agreement. They received the Super Gazelle of the Year award, and then of course there was also an infringement suit in Germany. And most recently, the Techstream material was also included on the NASA helicopter Ingenuity on the Mars expedition. Okay, so I see that we have a question in chat, which I hope I might respond to. What's the difference between an American university spin-off and a startup in Turkey or Europe? Well, in Sweden, at least, where this spin-off was started, the university became a part owner, but the inventors also became a part owner, and a new legal entity was formed. So a limited liability company was formed with some different owners, and all these activities took place in this limited liability company instead of the licensing being handled by a technology transfer office, for example. So I hope that answers your question. Any more questions?
Hi, Karen. Yeah, there are in fact coming in questions, but I didn't want to sort of interrupt you
No,
as well.
that's fine.
We can keep those for the end. But there was another question sort of asking how Oxeon actually financed its IP strategy, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they did have sales rather early on, but they also took in some venture capital. Are there any other questions for me?
So if you are free to take them now, then
yes, please.
Yeah, there is another one asking whether the IP originates from a European project or whether it was in any way related to a new funded project.
No, it was not. It did not originate from a European project.
There is another one asking for the professor's privilege, which is indeed a very valid point, and how the inventor and Oxeon later on dealt with that one.
Yes, that's correct. Sweden is one of the few countries where you still have a professor's privilege, meaning that as a starting point, the inventor owns his or her results. So this meant that Dr. Cooker could file for patent protection together with the business angels, and then place the patent applications in a company, and then he also became the owner. I think what you shouldn't forget, though, which wasn't relevant in this case, but which may be relevant in other cases, is that even though Sweden does have a professor's privilege, it's possible to agree otherwise. So it's not absolute. It's possible to come to another agreement. But in this case, it meant that Dr. Cooker could, instead of being the owner of the patents, he could become an owner of the limited liability company, owning the patents and commercializing them through that company.
So Karen, I just also jump in because there are also 1-2 questions on my desk which I received. So one of them is just that you mentioned that at the beginning of the business journey of Oxeon, it was a long-term plan to become a supplier to the aerospace industry. So why actually did Oxeon adapt its business model and is now actually becoming an intense player in the sports equipment? Did that pay off?
Yes, it did. Getting into the aerospace is kind of a long-term commitment, and there are lots of regulatory requirements, and well, basically, it's required that you prove yourself quite a lot. So that was always the long-term goal. But at the same time, if you also want to be able to sell material very early on, then the sports equipment is a very good place to start, because you can sell to extreme sports basically, and there aren't at all as much regulatory requirements, and there's a willingness to experiment with this extreme application basically, and see what you can do with them. So I think this is absolutely paid off. And at the same time, that also meant that you could consider, you could move on with the long time plan to also get into aerospace.
Oh, many thanks for those insights. So just a last question from my side is that, I mean, we've seen that Oxeon is actually a great example how patents can support technology transfer from the university, from Chalmers to the market. So, I mean, you having studied the case really in detail, so what, from your point of view, are the most, let's say, critical ingredients that a successful transfer from the university to the market needs to have?
Well, I think that actually commercializing this in a limited liability company of its own, and also having the access to the time of the two students from Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship, combined then with the inventor, and also that the inventor has all the time being very much involved in the IP strategy as well, which has been a tremendous asset for Oxeon. And also to think broadly, I think, and try to think not just what you can use patents for in-house, but also what you actually can get out of them together with others, even though that might not necessarily be your main business model, but still being open to that. And they still have information on their homepage, for example, stating that they are open to licensing opportunities if the right match comes along.
Thanks for that. So I'm handing over to Stephanie. Are there any questions or additional questions?
Well, they are, to be honest. So people find this very interesting, obviously. So there's one question, sort of how easy Oxeon has been able to identify infringement in Germany, and why this happened in Germany only, apparently.
Yes, the Oxeon does have some. They do keep an eye on the market. Obviously, they are present at exhibitions, etc. But they are also scanning the market, seeing what kind of possibilities there are. They also now have several distributors, and the distributors also come into contact with other things, etc. So that is one way of keeping it under supervision, basically. And when it comes to the German case, I think that it was actually a strategic choice to take this infringement to court in Germany.
Okay, yeah, there's also a subsequent question regarding that, who actually took the lead in this sort of legal battle, whether it was the inventor or the company, since, you know, there's obviously budget required to fight such a legal fight. Yes, I don't know whether you have any insights into that.
Yeah, that was the company, and so the inventor basically has assigned the patents to the company. So the company took the lead on that, but it was very expensive, and even though they won the case, they still didn't get compensation for all the legal costs, because, as you're saying, that is expensive, and this is a Swedish company, and they also had to work with not only the Swedish IP firm, but also having a local counsel in Germany. So of course that quickly became expensive.
Thanks a lot. And so while looking at the clock and at the time, there's one other question asking what will happen after the patent expires.
Oxeon has continuous development, so it's not. This is not a situation with just one patent. So there has definitely been more patents filed later on, and Oxeon continuously, again with the original inventor. Actually, I mean he's still working part time with Oxeon, and also with the others there. So they are identifying new developments, etc. So they've also continuously built on their patent portfolio. So it's not just the original patent and that patent family. There are several more patent families that have been filed since the inception.
Excellent. And then I think, yeah, paying attention to the time, I think we could come to a close and you can wrap up with your key takeaways. Sorry.
Well, just to wrap it up, the key takeaways. Consider patenting further along the value chain and protecting applications of technology closer to the consumer market. And also have a portfolio approach. Think about combining patents, trade secrets when that works better, and also trademarks. And involve top managers in the IP management process, and also from a marketing perspective, try to find the receptive niche markets first, and then you can go for the larger markets with the higher barriers of entry. So thank you all for some very interesting questions. I'm delighted to see that this is an engaging topic and that you are interested in the case. And thank you for listening to me. And I'm sure that the next case will be just as interesting. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks,
thank you, Caroline,
yeah,
for sharing.
absolutely.
So I'm handing over to Stephanie, and yeah, thanks a lot. It was very interesting.
I've already switched on my camera, and yeah, from Sweden we are now moving to Turkey and to the successful spin-out company Dermis Pharma, which is very much a story of 4 female inventors. And I'll pass the floor on to Ilya, who will be the moderator of that case, and also make sure that the experts have the right to present.
The next case is, as Stephanie already said, is a case from Turkey, which I found also very fascinating, and you will also see the difference to the previous one. We now have another industry, we have another country, and we also have another approach to commercialization. As you will see, it was not an easy journey. It was partially a difficult one, but I think the best persons let's say in the virtual room at the moment are Professor Fazalet and Mustafa, who were the head of the director of the TTO back at the time when the company or the journey started, and Mustafa, who was the coordinator and the manager at the TTO responsible for the case. Currently, they have different roles. So Mustafa has founded his own company, and if you have the time, please check it out. We provided the web address. And Professor Fazalet is now director at the Nanotechnology Research and Application Center and vice president of the University Industry Collaboration Centers platform of Turkey. So Professor Fazalet, Mustafa, many thanks for joining us for the session, and I give the floor to you, and looking forward to listen to it again.
Thank you, Ilya.
This is a product that can treat open wounds, particularly ulcers, diabetic ulcers. And it involved the development of biocompatible and biodegradable matrices for a skin patch. The skin patch has a special technology. It has a multi-layer structure containing microparticles with an antioxidant derived from olive oil, resveratrol. And it helps to heal the skin, and then it disappears when the body's own cells form the new tissue. And a single dosage leads to a full recovery within 2 weeks. So this was a special technology that has taken us a long time, something like 7 years to commercialize. And it was an interesting journey altogether. Maybe next slide, please. And the journey involved 5 different parties. Mustafa, it's still not on At least I cannot see it on the presentation mode.
I'm just trying to make it larger. When I make it in a full screen, it doesn't change.
Okay. Anyway, the journey involved 5 different parties which collaborated very intensely throughout the years. The first one was, of course, the university. It is one of the oldest universities in the country, and it was the owner of the IP rights during the patent application. The Technology Transfer Office, which was also relatively old by Turkish standards, established in 1994, it played as a catalyst throughout the whole process. The company, the startup company that was formed as throughout the journey, Dermis Pharma, was an IP-based university spin-off, and Abdi Ibrahim, a corporate pharma company which finally licensed the product, was one of the players, and of course TÜBİTAK, and a venture capital company financed by TÜBİTAK, was crucial in providing the finances. In the middle of all these, the 5 different pillars is, of course, the inventors. There were 4 different female inventors. Next slide, please. And they were actually from Ege University Pharmaceutical Technology Lab. But what was important about them is that they had a commercial mindset. So although they had a well-established lab, which was financed with a lot of governmental R&D, they had results, and they did not only turn these results into publications, but they also wanted to commercialize this. So with this mindset, they came to the Technology Transfer Office, and that's how the journey started. And we have a timeline for it. Maybe Mustafa, you can take it from there. Their invention started in 2011, and then by the time they started their PCT application, it was already 2014, and so on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Fazilet. So you have already made a great introduction before explaining this journey, which takes 7 years. Unbelievable when we think about the position that we're standing on. So it takes 7 years to commercialize the patent, and behind this success story, as you mentioned, that strong team is in the first place, and the second place there is a strong patent behind the story, and also the third one is the strong TTO that you will also be mentioning about the dimensions of the strong TTO in this case study. So maybe I can take over this slide with the timeline when we start to think about the commercialization of this technology. This 4 women-led inventor team came to the Technology Transfer Office with their patent application that you have already mentioned about the professor privilege in Turkey. At that time, they had right to apply their own patent application, and then they came to the university TTO to ask what is the next step for this technology to commercialize and to make to create a benefit, to create a value from this technology. And then as a TTO, we evaluate this technology in terms of the commercial benefits or enforceability of the technology in terms of the patent enforcement. And we decided to include this technology into our patent portfolio. And then the story has started at that point, because in that point, 2 years, in a 2 years period, we tried to license this technology to potential pharmaceutical companies in Turkey, in Europe, in the United States, but it was quite early stage, and there are so many risks because if we are talking about the pharmaceutical technology, okay, we have a strong patent, but we had already need to complete some of the crucial steps like clinical trials, the quality tests, the biocompatible analysis, so many steps that we need to complete before the product launch. Even we are thinking about the licensing strategy. And 2 years passed out with this licensing strategy, but we believe our technology, we believed the strong patent, because we had already applied so many countries because of the university budget, and also we received a small venture capital funding before deciding the establishment of the spin-off company. And also these inventors were receiving the governmental funding to increase the technology readiness level of the technology, to push it into the market. So after these licensing efforts, maybe we can mention about the strong dimensions of the strong TTO, because if we didn't establish the real IP policy and the technology transfer management pillars, maybe this case study cannot be a successful story. Am I right, Professor?
Yes, everything was at its infancy, really, because it was the period when Turkey made the transition from professor's privilege to IP belonging to universities. It was 2010, 2011. And during this transition phase, everything was very vague, so things were not very definite. But Ege University, through its TTO, was very fast in taking action and actually defining its institutional IP policy. So once this was defined, and when it passed through the University Senate, the academicians were more aware of their rights and how they should be proceeding. And although this patent was first applied by the researchers, they immediately decided to transfer it to the university so that the TTO can cover the costs, and that's how we proceeded to apply for the PCT and so on. And once they knew the procedures defined by the TTO, and with the strong TTO team behind them, they were encouraged to take courageous steps towards commercialization. And it was really waters that were not known to them. The waters were unknown to all of us, because there weren't very many success stories. But they took baby steps, and they took a startup acceleration program where they increased their background knowledge on commercialization of research results. And one by one, they were able to secure funds to finalize their clinical trials and find a commercial partner. So the guidance of the TTO throughout this process was very important. It was a learning process altogether, both for the TTO, both for the teams in the TTO, for the university, as well as for the academicians. But the perseverance was the key term. They never gave up. They believed in their technology. We believed in them, and the team worked very closely together with the TTO. And I think that was essential if there was any success. Of course,
thank you so much.
Strong patent was also very important. The patent was very strong.
Exactly. So after the dimensions of the strong TTO, maybe we can turn back to the timeline, because there was an aha moment after the long licensing efforts, because as you mentioned that we have already participated in a startup acceleration program, although we are not a startup. So we were acting as a startup to commercialize our technology with our researcher team, and then we thought that maybe we can gain something positively by participating in this kind of acceleration program, even we are not a startup company. And then we participated this startup acceleration program in Istanbul, and then after the jury voting, our technology was selected in the first position in this competition. And then the aha moment was turned the mindset of the researchers to running on a licensing strategy to establishing a spin-off company by also receiving the governmental funding and also venture capital funding. And all the things were changed after that moment, because after the spin-off company has established, the university has assigned all the IPs to the spin-off company in exchange of the binding agreement. And then this spin-off company has continued to increase the technology readiness level by completing the clinical trials, by receiving the government funding, but the budget is not enough. And then they went to the venture capital company to receive the rest of the money. And also the corporate company, we call it Abdi Ibrahim, is one of the pharmaceutical company in Turkey. We were also flirting with this company on the licensing terms, but this company has believed the technology after establishment of the spin-off company, and also the reducing the risks by completing these clinical trials. This Abdi Ibrahim company has also came to the licensing agreement, not licensing agreement, IP assignment agreement with the spin-off company, and then this spin-off company has assigned its IP rights to the Abdi Ibrahim company in exchange of some of the royalties for the revenues on this technology. And this technology has turned to a product now, and all the CE applications and all the essential regulatory approvals has been completed. And now, as the product is on the market, it has already been selling in the market, and all the people who have an open wound, which is a very important disease, and because there is no relevant treatment methodology before this product. And now we are so happy that we are touching the people's lives by bringing this breakthrough technology to the market, although it takes 7 years. Maybe we can also mention about some of the takeaways. What do you think about, Professor Fazilet? We can jump to the takeaways.
Yes, I think we're running out of time. We will be taking some questions as well. There are 4 main takeaways we would like to emphasize. One is the special technology transfer model. We started with a spin-off and then turned into licensing into a corporate company. But it took us a long time to try to find the right route for this. The funding protection was important because the patent cost was high, and we had to have some outside funding, and state funds were a great help because the university couldn't do more than just guiding us through. There weren't enough funds in the university either. Maybe you would like to continue with some of the takeaways. The IP expertise, the next one.
Yeah. I can. So as we mentioned in the dimensions of the strong TTO, is one of the vertical is IP expertise and also the market expertise. So it brings us to have a great network in the worldwide to ask some of the critical market question to the thought leaders when you are trying to commercialize your technology. And also in that time, I had get very good advantage by reaching out the LAS international members in different countries who are leading an IP management of the pharmaceutical companies, and we were able to ask these IP thought leaders about the market coverage before deciding the protection countries. So that's why including the in-house IP expertise in the TTO. So you need to have a great network to ask some of the critical questions before the commercialization, before the licensing agreement. So that was also the critical takeaway we can suggest. And startup creation, of course, the university should have a well-defined IP policy to emphasize the spin-off creation formalities or conditions. Let's say all the university researchers should have known the conditions. If they decide to establish their own company, they need to know the conditions of licensing conditions that will use this IP in their spin-off company. That's why the acceleration programs, pre-incubation programs for academicians are critical, and the other one is well-defined IP policy to describe the spin-off and licensing conditions. Maybe we can say as a last for takeaways. So we can jump to the questions if we have.
We have several questions, and I have to select some. Let me start with the first one. I will go through a chronological order. So first of all, you have been financed by venture capitalists, and one of the questions is why were you selected? So what were the criteria for the venture capitalists to invest in Dermis Pharma in the company?
Maybe I can explain this. That venture capital investment was an early stage investment, and it's a kind of proof of concept funding. It's a kind of limited funding ticket size that was run by a private venture capitalist funded by European Investment Bank, and that was needed because we received this small amount of venture capital funds to apply more than 30 countries to cover IP protection in different countries. Because we, after our market research, we have defined some of the critical countries, but the university budget is limited to cover this IP coverage. IP country coverages. That's why we asked to the venture capital to invest on this company, and we have used the money to protect our IP in different countries.
But it was a very competitive selection process, and the patent was strong. It was an attractive technology with a lot of social use, so we were selected amongst many applicants. So the attractiveness of the technology and its social dimension, I think, was crucial in why we were selected.
Okay, thanks. I hope that question is answered, but maybe a related point. One of the questions is, how crucial was the animal study? What was the role of the animal studies for the commercialization process?
Well, it had to be proven that the material was biocompatible, no toxicity involved at the tissue level and genetic level. So cytotoxicity, genotoxicity were tested. It had to be proven before the clinical tests. A preliminary screening had to be done at that level. That was a preclinical stage testing trial.
Or I can also comment on that because these researchers, when they come to the university TTO to apply patent application, they have already completed the animal tests. That means that by deciding investing on these research results, it is really critical to see these animal tests because it increases the technology readiness level and decreasing the risk.
Who covered actually, and I think this is also related to the investment question, for the development after the inclusion in the portfolio of the technology transfer offices? So how was that stage actually financed?
Which stage? Maybe you can repeat it.
Can you repeat that question?
After the TTO decided to include basically the patent and the technology project into the portfolio of the technology transfer office, how was basically the project finance until the stage that basically that the company was later on established and it started in a way benefiting from the support from Abdi Ibrahim?
They applied for additional funding. They wrote another project as to mature the technology readiness level, and they continued their studies from the proof of concept level to a more mature level during that time, and they assured government funding, right? TÜBİTAK funding. An additional project was written to provide finance while we were waiting to mature the technology.
I think we can say that one of the critical dimension of this success story is the governmental funding, right? The governmental funding opportunities in Turkey really helps to researchers to establish their own company, to increase the technology readiness level, even when they license the patent to a corporate company. So there are lots of incentives and the funding opportunities.
Maybe two last questions for each of you, or maybe it's the same for both. Maybe first to you, Mustafa. As we know, establishing networks is very important. You also mentioned the network that you established with LES. And networks are important, first of all, to understand how to manage IP, but also networks to find partners in commercializing the technology. Do you have an advice, because you had to start from scratch? How would somebody else in another university or with a project or let's say a TTO, which is in an early development stage, what would be the advice to establish those networks?
I think it's all about the network creation. So besides the know-how, of course, IP expertise, but as I already mentioned during this timeline, when we decide to select some of the promising markets for our technology, so it takes us to a very expensive, the market research reports. So and we have limited budget. Instead of buying these, the expensive market research reports, we used our existing network through the license LIS International, because there are lots of IP experts and IP professionals in worldwide, and they had a great experience on different sectors, on the licensing, the patent portfolio management and the commercialization. So it is really crucial to create your own network and expand your network after your own national country. So to do that, if you want to do that, you can join different networks like LIS International or any IP related, the association or networks or other communities, because that creates a great network to ask anybody in your related IP questions.
Thank you.
I think the trick is to create synergies between opportunities of different networks at European level and also at national level. Personal networks, institutional networks, and I think at the time now, the TTOs are more lucky because the awareness for commercialization of research results have increased considerably in the last 7-8 years. So now the ecosystem is more ready for accepting university-based research results into industry.
Many thanks. I think the ecosystem is a very good transition to our last part. But before closing that session, maybe one last thing, and I think that was also a question from the audience, but also I would very interested in that. If there's one mistake that you, in retrospect, would have loved to avoid in the case, what would it be?
Well, I don't think we made any mistakes, because the mistakes were important lessons. And by trial and error, we found the right way. So if we hadn't made those mistakes, we wouldn't have known the right way. Maybe this is a rhetorical answer, but that's how I would like to answer it.
I think this is a very smart answer. Mustafa, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, maybe I don't know, we can count as a mistake or something, but maybe we can decrease the licensing effort time. But that was the mistake in that time, because the Professor Fazilet said that the Turkey's ecosystem in terms of the innovation and entrepreneurship was not mature on that time. That's why we first choose the easiest one by choosing the licensing strategy. Maybe if we are doing that period now, maybe we can directly jump to the entrepreneurial side to establish their own spin-off company, and then try to corporate partnership.
Many thanks for the wonderful session. I think I found it great, and especially the Q&A as well. And many thanks for answering those questions and sharing the experience with us. Everyone is invited to read the full case study that you can do on our website, epo.org case study. And I will show the URL in a few seconds. And of course, this is brand new. We have also a podcast about the case study with Mustafa Chakir and Professor Evan Gökçe, who's one of the co-inventors and also the co-founders. It's now live on EPO's Talk Innovation channel, so please feel free to listen to it, and you will see very interesting perspective, especially from Professor Evran, who basically in the beginning wanted to have a patent because she found it cool. But as you can see, there's a whole story that developed out of finding something nice to have. But she put a lot of effort into it, and together with Professor Fazelet and Mustafa made it to a great success story. So many thanks for this.
The last word is never give up.
We thank you for the opportunity. It was very enjoyable to go back and remember it all and relate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilya, Stephanie. Thanks.
Well, welcome. And we're sort of time's flying, but still, and I would give you a very brief look ahead and sort of give you an outlook on where we stand and what's going to happen with the case studies and everything around it. So yeah, please go on.
So quickly before we finish, as you know, once content is created, it's very important that it also reaches the right audience so that people can use it. And in a way, the journey for us as the EPO has already started a few years ago when we started with a series of case studies, back then focusing on small and medium-sized enterprises. And the idea back then was to present 12 case studies about European SMEs, how small, medium-sized companies actually use patents for business success. And I will show you the difference to the current project. But maybe the best example is Picotel, which is a very relatively old and established company in the construction business. But at one point in time, they actually discovered that in their operations, they have developed new tools, which are much better than the tools that were already available on the market. And actually, one person gave them the advice or suggested that it can actually be patented because it's new, it's innovative. And this is what they did. And based on those early patents, and they developed into an R&D company, which generates 50% or currently even more of their turnover with those new tools. So as you can see, there are also traditional companies that can turn into innovative companies with the help of patents and also reach the markets. However, when doing those case studies, we realized that there are many SMEs which are actually which have their origins at universities and many other let's say products that have their origins at the university laboratories. And we know that technology transfer from universities and public research organizations are very important. And therefore, we decided to extend the series of case studies, the series of innovation case studies, to include technology transfer journey. As you can see, we plan to add in total 7 technology transfer case studies about companies, but also products or projects that originated from laboratories at European universities. Stephanie, next slide, please. But what was important for us is not only to give the geographical scope. As you can see, we are trying to cover as many European countries as possible because we know that every country is unique. we know that there are different regulations, and as we have heard from Caroline, there are countries with the professor privilege, there are countries without the professor privilege, there are countries where we have an established industry, where there are other countries where the industry or this particular market is not established enough, and therefore it was important to cover a broader geographical landscape. But as you know, there are also other dimensions that play an important role. One of them being the industry or the market that the company is acting in, or for which the technology is actually destined. And as you can see, with the 7 case studies, we are trying to cover as many different markets or industry as possible, being in the textiles or high-tech textiles area, as the Oxeon case showed, medical technologies for Dermis Pharma, or the energy market, road vehicles, bicycle, in particular additive manufacturing or medical imaging, which we will try to cover with a still to come case studies on which we are currently working on. But there's also a third dimension, which is the different type of technology transfer. As you know, there's a possibility to do it through licensing agreement, through spin-out companies, or through already R&D collaboration with universities, which can afterwards result in a new company, which was the case for the Irish company Atlantic Therapeutics that is already published, where you have a project, an industry, university collaborations at the Irish institutions, which later on developed into a product, and then it was decided to create a new spin-off because the parties involved were convinced that through a new company they had a better possibility to reach new markets in the United States, in Asia, but also new markets in Europe. So as you can see, what is important is that once the content is created, what we want to achieve is that it reaches as many people as possible to raise awareness, but also to be used for training activities. And I think we have very interesting and exciting things planned together with the European IP Helpdesk.
Yes, thanks very much. Just very briefly, because I know we're running out of time a little bit, or already keep you longer. So just to mention, as Ilya already mentioned a minute ago, there are additional and more case studies coming up, and those will be released still this year and then next year. And going along and with those case studies are the podcast episodes, Telco Innovation. Also, as just mentioned, a brand new one has been released today on the Dermis Pharma case, but we also have one on Oxeon and even on a third publication or a case study that we did earlier. So please feel free to check those out, and more podcasts are to come. And then we're planning on organizing a training series based on those case studies from lab to market, taking a closer look at the individual cases, giving it a little bit more room and space to discuss certain aspects, more time than we actually had in this overview event today. So please keep an eye out for those ones that are coming up next year. And there will also be a joint publication sort of bringing those different cases and learnings together, and this will be done by the EUPO, by us, the European IP Helpdesk, and the Licensing Executive Society International. And all of this is also, so all the ideas and activities around these case studies are kind of embedded in the High Growth Technology Business Initiative, which you might have heard of, and where specific forums are organized. And here I'll sort of play the ball back to Ilya, telling you a little bit more about the 2 upcoming ones.
Indeed, I just want to spend 1 minute on 2 events which are coming up end of this month and mid of November, which are our high growth technology business forums. And what we want to achieve here is that we want entrepreneurs and investors in the deep tech sectors, so the ones that where the business model or the activity is heavily relying on research and development, and therefore they come to us and or they use the patent system to tell their stories. And here you have decision makers, so CEOs of those companies who tell their journeys. One of them, the first one on the 28th of October, will be focused on growth financing. So what is the perspective of investors? So how do investors perceive the ownership of IP, but also how a company is developing a business model or a strategy based on IP, how they see it. And the company that will be presented there is Plasmap Co Limited. And we also have a kind of a panel discussion with other participants or from the ecosystem, so investors, but also larger companies who will comment on the journey of that company. So please tune in on the 28th of October. And the next one will take the perspective of build to sell, meaning that deep tech enterprises that are trying or planning ahead for an exit strategy. So meaning that they want to grow and later on they want to be bought by another company or make an IPO. And here we will have as our guest Paul Atherton, who is one of the most successful serial technology entrepreneurs from the United Kingdom, who will share his experience, and it's of course very large. And he will also have the possibility to ask questions. So please register before the 15th of November for the event on the 18th of November. Maybe to put it into a broader perspective, as you can see, what we are trying to achieve with those activities is that we want to create a community for high growth technology businesses and really to bring the ecosystem together. And here, Mustafa made earlier a very good transition. We want to bring all those players around those high growth technology businesses, so the decision makers, the investors, the business consultants, but also the IP professionals, so that they can all contribute to this network, so that people can make linkages and get to know people and understand what is the role of the other party, and all that centered around the role of IP. And we have created that community on the LinkedIn page. So please, if you have not joined it yet, please do so and follow us on HTB Initiative, where we are trying to provide the contact where you can try and connect to other people. And we also announce all the events. And this is a joint initiative, as you can see, with the Licensing Executive Society and the European IP Helpdesk.
Yeah, and so just very briefly, moving on, so it's just mentioned by Ilya, it's a lot about bringing together communities, creating synergies, making sure that the community is catered to in the best possible way and able to learn and share experiences. And so we are happy as the European IP Helpdesk to be part of those initiatives. Just a very brief reminder, as mentioned in the beginning, we are a service initiative of the European Commission, and we belong to actually an intellectual property helpdesk family, which will get a new member very soon, still this week. The Africa IP SME Helpdesk will launch. And what we provide is really a free of charge first line IP support. And we're very happy to be part of those initiatives, the H2B, but also the collaboration that we have with the EPO, because it really sort of is ultimately for the benefit of SMEs and researchers that we try to help navigate the IP landscape that sometimes may seem a little bit too complex to be dealt with. And so we provide training. We have an extensive publication library next to sort of supporting the EPO case studies. We have case studies of our own, and there's also a helpline. So just for you to get an overview in case you have not been familiar with the IP Helpdesk before, and also just to underline that some more events and training calendar or opportunities for you if your calendar is not full already. So lots of to take note of, but we have this extensive training scheme on a regular basis, and these are the sessions that are coming up until the end of this year. So feel free to check out the calendar and choose what you're most interested in. And in general, keep an eye out for the different communication platforms that we have, as mentioned by Ilya already. So there is this HTB LinkedIn group, which you're welcome to join. You're also welcome to join the European IP Helpdesk one or the EPO LinkedIn group. So again, there's a wealth of material out there of communication channels, and specifically on the upcoming updates and activities, we will keep you informed through the newsletter, through Twitter. We're present there, and so we hope that you enjoyed this session, that we could inspire you in a way. And thank you very much for joining. Maybe as a last remark from my end, there will be a follow-up email, so you will receive the presentation. You will also receive, the case studies once more. We will attach that to the email, because I also saw someone asking for the, the patent details and the application number. So you will all find this in the detailed case studies, which we really invite you to take a look at and to sort of dive deeper into. And yeah, I think we are at the end of this event now. So I'm also thanking all our speakers for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure. Maybe they push on their cameras again. But I also know that Caroline already had to leave. So thank you once more to all the participants staying with us until the end, and also all those that have joined us at the very beginning. It's been a pleasure, and as mentioned, it's just been sort of the beginning of further events to come, so this year and then next year. Thanks a lot, everyone. Oh, and also maybe I should mention, I see that still a lot of questions are coming in, so they all will be saved, and we will figure out how to, get them answered, at least some of them. It's really great to see that there's been such an interest in our presentations and in the talks. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a nice remainder of the afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.